today in round 9 of the candidates tournament in Moscow. Fabiano Caruana and Anish Giri played 96 moves. Lasted 7 hours. It was a fascinating game in all its phases, but it finally ended in a draw. So Anish Giri keeps up his 100% record. He has 9 draws. And Caruana maintains his +1 in the tournament. We're not going to look at that game. I'll leave that to someone else. Instead, we're going to look at the game between Vishwanathan Anand and Levon Aronian. Of course, Aronian sharing first in the tournament going into this round. And, well, Levon is a very phlegmatic kind of guy. Very laid back. Sometimes a little bit too laid back. In this opening, he played a little bit inexactly. And, well, you can see that Anand has a really nice positional advantage here. Problem is that rook is stuck in the corner. In order for the rook to get out, you have to exchange in the middle, and that will open up the c-file. In the meantime, white has a really big space advantage, which you can try to exploit on the other side of the board. And that's what Anand did here. He played f4. You could also play h4 or g4, but basically the squeeze is on here. But f4 is a very nice idea because it opens up the third rank for a rook to swing across. And this, of course, is the great thing about having a space advantage. You have greater maneuverability for your pieces. So the rook just swung across, hitting the pawn here, and h6. Now there's a weakness here, bear that one in mind. The rook comes across. If g5, well, obviously black doesn't really want to open the position when the rook is stuck across the other side of the board. So rook e7, bit passive, but what can you do? And rook g6, the rook comes into this rather nice square. Excuse me a second. Now if black tries to go for counterplay with c6, the problem is that white will take and then play e5. This is a very nice move. And you can see this brings, well, both rooks into play actually. This is very nice, and yeah, black is in huge trouble there. So black just has to play passively. Aronian exchanged. Now of course he has to bring his rook into the game. And Anand can just build up very slowly. Here, I mean, it's always difficult when you're defending these kind of positions to know exactly which setup to go for. Aronian played rook e8. It might well have been better to put the king round here. And the point is this, that after the king comes in fact, white's king is perhaps not as secure as it might be after h5. You have to be a little bit, that takes away the square from the king, and sometimes it might be possible to play this move and check and snag that rook here. So king e8 and king f7 probably a better defence, but very hard to determine that, and white would still be better of course. In the game, Aronian played rook e8, and here I think Anand seized his chance very well. He moved his king up the board, king g4. Great idea, and again, this is one of those really tricky moments with black where you have to decide, do you remain passive or do you break out? I can understand why Aronian didn't want to remain passive, because if the king comes into f5, then at some moment this rook might return, and then maybe the king comes into g6. I don't know. It doesn't look nice. Maybe you can break things open as well with g5. In any case, I can understand why Aronian wanted to take on e4, and now it gets very tricky. And Aronian was short of time as well. I mean, maybe king d8 is better here. It's very hard to say, but this is probably still okay for black. And now Anand could take here and go for it straight away, and then this turns into a race. But The problem is that suddenly white's pieces are a little bit offside, and black certainly has counterplay here. On instinct, Anand played rook d2, and he said after the game it's easier to control the pawns, he means black's pawns, with 4 rooks on the board. Very nice intuition from Anand. And here, Aronian, last move of the time control, flicked in king b8. He should probably play king b7, as we'll see later on. He might be a move ahead with his counterplay, but again, very hard to determine. It's such a complicated endgame. So when king b8 and rook c2 puts pressure here, and that drags the rook over to defend, and only then did Anand go to defend the a-pawn. So black has counterplay by taking this pawn, but Anand moved his king in. Well, I think we can see very clearly that Anand stands better here. His king is very, very active compared to black's, but of course it could turn into a race. And, well, races can be very unpredictable. It's hard to calculate them in advance. g3 from Anand. Good move, of course, if you take, instead of playing g3, then rook h4 check and wins that pawn there. So first g3, push the rook away, and then take here. Now black gets a bit of counterplay with d5. But somehow this should be winning. And in fact, both players were convinced after the game that instead of king h5, it's better to play king g5 and then advance the h-pawn. And there's a big difference. You'll see in the game that black had a chance to take one of these pawns, but in this case, after the h-pawn starts moving in combination with the g-pawn, in fact these pawns are secure, and with the king supporting 2 connected pass pawns, that must be winning. But instead king h5, and that gives black a little bit of a chance. We'll see why and how in a second. So Anand chooses to push the g-pawn instead. That's the point of playing king h5. But here it's a little bit tricky. Anand played h4. I think originally he was going to go for rook d2, but he saw that in this case black would gain counterplay. Now, this is still very tricky. I think white still might be winning this position, but you can see how black is getting counterplay here. In any case, Anand played h4. I mean, these kind of endings are so difficult. So rook d4, threatening d2, and rook d2. And now Aronian started to push his king, move his king across the board to try and stop these pawns. You can see if that king had been on b7, then he might have been able to get some quicker counterplay with c6 here. In any case, king c8, g5. And this still might not be over. So instead of pushing the g-pawn, Anand exchanges pawns. He plays king g6, so that allows rook takes pawn, but rook d3 gives white's rook a little bit more freedom, of course. King e8, and now Anand decided to defend that a-pawn with rook a3. And here probably Aronian made the decisive mistake. Instead, rook g4 is probably the only chance, and the point is, well, we'll see in the game, after rook c4, Anand played king g7, and that shuts out black's king. Rook g4 just means it's not so easy for white to sort of set up the perfect position. Even so, this may well be losing. It's very, very close. I mean, this is just a pretty random line. I haven't had the whole day to check lines here, but this gives you just a little bit of an idea of the kind of things that could go on. And here, well, black just has more counterplay, and it might even be possible to bring his king over to support these pawns to get some counterplay. But I mean, it's absolutely touch and go whether black holds this position or not. But in any case, I think that was the only chance for black to play. Whoops, I beg your pardon, I managed to mess up the position. The only chance was really to play rook g4 here. But let me show you what happened in the game. Rook c4, and now king g7. I think this is completely winning. This counterplay on the other side of the board is simply too slow. g7 threatens to make a queen. If rook f4 check, then let's say rook here and rook g3 just stops the rook coming here, and you make a queen. So rook g4 played, going behind pawn. So Anand recaptures. Problem is, it's not easy, or actually it's impossible for black's king to get counterplay. You know, if black could somehow give up this rook for the pawn, and the king would take here and support this pawn, okay, that's another story. But here it's just not possible. So for example, king d6, rook c3 is a good move to cut the king and threaten this. And this is actually pretty easy. Once you take this pawn, you go behind the a pawn. Aronian played here. I mean, now it's utterly lost. And the king was checked into a bad position, and rook e5 is the classic winning idea, to put the rook in the way and then make a queen. So Aronian has to take, he can of course take the rook straight away, but one last little finesse from Anand. He checked first, and Aronian resigned. It just means that the king is even worse off in this position, because there is absolutely no way that the king can help the a pawn. So white is just a rook up for nothing, and of course it's a winning position. I'm sorry I had to go through that endgame at such speed. It deserves a more in-depth treatment, but not from me. And not at the moment, when I have to get a report out quickly. But I do think that, though there were probably inaccuracies, Anand really deserved that victory. You know, he built up a superb position out of the opening, and he certainly did enough to win there. So Anand powering through in this tournament. He now shares the lead with Aronian. They're both on 5.5 out of 9, and then Aronian and Caruana on 5 points follow them, and Giri still on 50% on 4.5. But really, with 5 rounds to go, it's still absolutely wide open. If any of those players put together a couple of wins, you know, that could propel them to the top. So it's all good stuff. Tomorrow is a free day in Moscow, and round 10 will be played on Wednesday. Till then.